जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी। यशोदनंदन ब्रज जन रंजना। यशोदनंदन ब्रज जन रंजना। यमुना तीरा वनचारी। यमुना तीरा वनचारी। जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी। जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी। जय श्री श्री राधा माधव की। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरये। नस्तप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तम श्लोके भक्तिर्भवती नैष्टिकी। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे. So we welcome all devotees today in the morning for Srimad Bhagavatam class. The verse today is from the 3rd canto. We are looking at the 14th chapter and the verse is text 10. It is entitled Pregnancy of Diti in the Morning. Diti uvacha esha mam tvatkrite vidvan kama atta sharasanaha dunoti dinam vikramya rambham iva matangajaha. Diti uvacha esha mam tvatkrite vidvan kama atta sharasanaha dhunoti dinam vikramya rambham iva matangajaha. Diti ruvacha Esha mam tvatkrite vidvan Kama atta sharasanaha Dunoti dinam vikramya Rambham iva matangajaha. Sarashanaha Doti dinam vikramya Rambhamiva. Vaishnavis Iti ruvacha Shamam tvatkrite vidvan Kama ata sharasanaha Dunoti dinam vikramya Eshamam tvatkrite vidvan Kama atta sharasanaha Diti Uvacha. Beautiful Diti said, Eshaha, all these, Mam, unto me, Tvatkrite, for you, Vidvan, O learned one, Kamaha, Cupid, Atta Sharasanaha, taking his arrows, Dunoti, distresses, Dinam, poor me, Vikramya, attacking, Rambham, banana tree, Iva, like, Matam Gajaha, mad elephant. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Please repeat the translation. In that place, the beautiful Diti expressed her desire. O learned one, Cupid is taking his arrows and distressing me forcibly as a mad elephant troubles a banana tree. Please hear the purport. Beautiful Diti, seeing her husband absorbed in trance, began to speak loudly, not attempting to attract him by bodily expressions. She frankly said that her whole body was distressed by sex desire because of her husband's presence, just as a banana tree is troubled by a mad elephant. It was not natural for her to agitate her husband when he was in trance, but she could not control her strong sexual appetite. Her sex desire was like a mad elephant, and therefore it was the prime duty of a husband to give her all protection by fulfilling her desire. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapada Kamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute तप्त कांचन गौरांगे राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये नमो महावदन्याय कृष्ण प्रेमा प्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्ण चैतन्य नाम्ने गौरे द्विषे नमः वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभो नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधरा श्रीवासदि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. So in this verse, I'm sorry, I'm going to lose my voice very soon, but I'm praying I keep it until I end the class. In this verse, this entire chapter is a very powerful chapter because Jai and Vijay are about to take birth into this world by the Lord's arrangement, and the pastimes of the Lord as Varaha slaying Hiranyaksha is going to come into being. And just before that, we come to understand how is it that Jai and Vijay, by the Lord's arrangement, they come into this world through the pregnancy of Diti, and that too during a most inauspicious time. Sometimes there is this concept of auspiciousness and inauspiciousness, and sometimes as devotees, if we are not careful in this material world, we are also caught up by being very attached to the idea of auspiciousness and inauspiciousness. But we should not forget that anything that is related and connected to Krishna automatically becomes auspicious. We mustn't also forget that at the time when the Lord was appearing in this world, the constellations lined up to ensure that they were in the right frame of auspiciousness to receive the Lord. It wasn't that the Lord had to choose an auspicious time to come. If the Lord were to choose an auspicious time to come, then auspiciousness should be greater than the Lord. So we should be very clear that when we take up the process of Krishna consciousness, the moment we have taken it up, everything becomes auspicious. The problem is sometimes that we connect auspiciousness with good and bad things that are happening in our lives. But auspiciousness means that we are under the control of Krishna. And therefore, whether it appears to be bad or whether it appears to be good, if Krishna's hand is there, and if we have the ability to see Krishna's hand in there, then what looks like an unfavorable situation becomes a favorable situation. In the first canto, 19th chapter, as Parikshit Maharaj was welcoming all the sages in Naimisharanya, and just before he sat down to hear Shukadeva Goswami, he said a very important point. He said that he saw the Brahmana's curse as the hand of Krishna. And he sees that the Brahmana's curse was nothing inauspicious, because he understands that if not for the Brahmana's curse, he would have been so caught up with the affairs of his material kingdom that he would not have time to sit down and study Srimad Bhagavatam. So therefore, for a devotee, the great auspiciousness is actually with Bhagavatam. There is a nice verse, I'm trying to remember, it's in 12:48 of Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's very related to this shloka today and the purport. When you have time, you should see it. 12:48. Sankirtyamano Bhagavan Anantaha Shrutanubhavo Vyasanam hi pumsam Pravishya chittam Vidunoti ashesham Yato yatha tamo arko abram Ivati vataha. Shukadeva Goswami, towards the end of Srimad Bhagavatam, he says so nicely that when people properly glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Srila Prabhupada's mercy, this forum of sitting down to hear about Bhagavatam is actually the proper glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Shukadeva Goswami goes on to say that if we just try to properly glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or we simply hear about his power, so we don't, even if we don't have the capacity to glorify Krishna, even if we just sit down to hear about his power, then Bhagavatam tells us the Lord personally enters into our hearts. the word that's used is personally enter, right? And not only does he enter into our hearts, but he cleanses away every trace of misfortune. Every trace of misfortune. And what is the greatest misfortune in the world? The greatest misfortune in the world is to not remember Krishna and instead to constantly forget him. So therefore, this is very relevant to what we are studying today, because Diti was in a situation where she was not at all remembering Krishna. And it was very difficult for her not to remember Krishna. It was difficult for her to remember Krishna because she was very, very much taken over by powerful material desires. And that was a challenge for her. Bhagavatam tells us that Diti was one of the 13 daughters, right, who were actually given to Kashyap. And Kashyap himself, the two personalities in this verse, Kashyap himself is a very powerful personality. But later on we will come to understand that even though Kashyap was very powerful and he had great control over his senses, he will eventually succumb to Diti, and that too at an inauspicious time. Even though he had first told her, just give it a few minutes more and we will be fine. But apparently even the few minutes was beyond his reach. And the reason for that, we understand, as Prabhupada writes in these purports, is that actually Kashyap's mood was that of an impersonalist. He was not a devotee in the sense of having devotional service in his heart for Krishna. So therefore, this situation is very, very reflective of what happens when devotional service is absent in our interactions. Kashyap and Diti were husband and wife. But we don't need to be husband and wife to interact at any level. As Vaishnavas, we are interacting every day. But the real challenge is, if we have Krishna in the center of our interactions, then the challenges of the material desires and the material disturbances, they can be checked. However, if Krishna is not in the center, then like Kashyap and Diti, their discussions here, if you see in the next few verses, there was nothing about Krishna. There was only what is auspicious time and what is not auspicious time. And that is not the consideration for a devotee. The consideration for a devotee is whether there is the presence of Krishna in every activity that he or she is engaging in. So this was the absence of Krishna, and this is what led ultimately to the disturbance of Diti. Diti came forward to express her desire, and it was right of her in one sense to express her desire to her husband, because if she doesn't express to her desire to her husband, to whom does she express her desire to? By Vedic conclusions, a wife who has a desire, she must express it to the husband. And it is also the duty of the husband. I forget I'll find the verse, but I remember there was a purport where Prabhupada says in the third canto also, Prabhupada states that a husband's duty is to liquidate his debts to his wife. What an interesting term. Liquidation is a very legal term, generally. It means we make you bankrupt, right? Right? I mean, I deal a lot with liquidation in Singapore as part of my legal practice. So I can tell you that when we liquidate someone, we literally wipe him out. That's what happens. So Prabhupada uses the word expertly. You know, there is no word in Bhagavatam that Prabhupada uses which is considered to be arbitrary, random, or capricious. It's always used perfectly. It's only a question of whether we appreciate it or not. So Prabhupada uses the word liquidate. And to liquidate the debt means to forever extinguish the debt. But the point is, until we have Krishna consciousness, all our debts in the world continue to remain in some form or the other, because they will come in seeds of desires. And so Diti's expression of a desire was actually met by Kashyap's response. And here you find that Diti, if you look at the purport, Diti saw that Kashyap was, and so she respected the fact that he was in a trance. And generally speaking, when a wife, the caliber of Diti, understands that a husband is in trance, she would not disturb him. And that is why here Srila Prabhupada writes that she did not want to disturb him by expression of bodily desires. She didn't want to show it that way. She had enough culture to express it loudly in the form of words. So this is very important. The other thing that I find fascinating about Bhagavatam is that sometimes in the material world, when we look at characters, we tend to paint them along black and white. But Srimad Bhagavatam's beauty is that all the characters are very nuanced. And as you study them and you study the purports of Prabhupada, you'll find that Prabhupada brings out the best of the characters in Bhagavatam, and also points out the difficult challenges they faced. And this is very helpful for us because we live in a material world full of challenges. This is the value of Bhagavatam. So here, Srila Prabhupada makes it a point to say that Diti expressed her desire in the best way she could. She spoke about it. And she expressed it very honestly. That was a good quality. And she said that she was so disturbed because of her husband's presence. This is very interesting. Which means that if her husband was not present, right, and if Diti was perhaps absorbed in Krishna consciousness, she may not have been disturbed. Which is why it's very interesting that you have the allegory, right, of the mad elephant troubling a banana tree. If the banana tree is left on its own, it will not be troubled. But when the mad elephant is passing by, then the banana tree is in trouble. So in the same way, when a husband and wife do not have Krishna in the center, then they will trouble each other. Whether it is by sexual desire or whether it is by finding fault with each other, that is going to happen. It is going to happen. Generally speaking, for those who are grahastas, you know that the first year of marriage is always the honeymoon period. And then after that, the realities of the marriage come. And the challenges of the marriage come. And that is true of every material relationship in this world. It is not unique to only that. So Diti was trying her best to express it. And the challenge here, as Prabhupada writes here, is that Diti's, the effect of these desires that she felt, that is very important. She was actually distressed. That is the word that is used here. She was distressed. And Prabhupada uses the word, she frankly said that her whole body was distressed by sex desire. Now this distress is a very important point because in Bhagavatam, it is very nicely stated that actually the moment we are born into this material world, everything that we go through is full of distress. And that is a fact that we cannot escape. In fact, what is very interesting is Prahlad Maharaj's instructions in 7.742 of Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is one of my favorite verses. Prahlad Maharaj says very nicely, in this material world, every materialist desires to achieve happiness and distress. Happiness, and he desires to diminish his distress. That is what every materialist wants to do. If you ask anybody what their goal of life is, they will say that I want to increase my happiness and I want to decrease or diminish my distress. But Prahlad Maharaj makes an observation. Actually, one is very happy as long as one does not endeavor for happiness. And then he goes on to say that as soon as his activities for happiness begin, that day the conditions of distress also start. This is an amazing point. If you do preaching and you talk to someone who's really smashed with the world and you introduce them to this concept, they begin to realize that actually my moment of distress started on the day when I started planning for my happiness. That's the day my moment of distress started. And Prahlad Maharaj goes on. I think it is it's in his prayers. It's in 7.9.17 of Srimad Bhagavatam. He says there, Dukkhaushadam tadapi dukkha matadhyayam. He says there beautifully that he's praying to Lord Nrsimhadev. He says, my Lord, the conditions, I believe that Dukkhaushadam tadapi dukkha matadhyayam. We are trying to find solutions and remedies to all the material problems of the world. But I think that the solutions themselves are often more troublesome than the misery in the first place. And that is also very true. For example, if you go and see a doctor, and the doctor gives you something for your cold or your cough, and then he'll give you another medicine because he'll say the effect of this medicine is going to cause you gastric. And so now you have to take a pill to take care of the gastric. And after you've taken care of the gastric, he'll give you something else because that medicine has another effect. And that effect will bring you some other problem. By the end of it, either you are dead or you're more sick. But either way, you're not recovering. So this is the condition of the material world. And this is what Diti was trying to run after. She was in so much Kashyap consciousness. You know, Kashyap is also K. You can ask yourself which ISKCON you want to belong to. Do you want to belong to the International Society for Krishna Consciousness or the International Society for Kashyap Consciousness? Because Diti's case was she was so absorbed in thinking that Kashyap will be the source of her happiness. Kashyap can actually fulfill all her desires. But by the end of this chapter, you will realize that Kashyap is the last person to fulfill her desires. Because by now, right, the plan of the Lord has come to manifest. And Diti will give birth to two terrible sons who will not be auspicious at all and who will bring so much calamity to the world. So this is a very important point we should understand about distress. And the point about distress we should never forget is that in any condition of life, wherever we are, the distresses will continue to come. Sometimes when we preach Krishna consciousness to devotees, newcomers, there is an inherent expectation that if I come to Krishna consciousness, all my distress will diminish. But the real truth is, when you come to Krishna consciousness, Krishna, our desire and our prayer is that Krishna will give us the strength to be able to face the difficulties. Because the difficulties never stop coming. There is a verse, what is that verse? It's 11:49. Dehendriya prana manodiyamyo janmapyaya shud bhayatarsha kriche samsara dharme avimuyamanaha smritya hare bhagavata pradhanaha. In this material world, the shloka tells us, one's material body is constantly subject to many, many things. One, this body is always subject to birth and decay. The moment we are born, we are deteriorating. That we should accept. So whatever that we have, it will eventually deteriorate and leave us. Even our relationships very often deteriorate in time. So nothing that we think is precious in this material world to fulfill our desire can actually continue. If you place your faith in something which is going to decay, then by logic, your faith is also going to decay. It is going to go with the decaying factor. So this is the first point. The second point, Bhagavatam tells us that as long as we live, our life air will always be harassed by thirst and hunger. Isn't it true? I keep thinking of drinking the water, but I just don't have the time to reach it. We are constantly thirsty, and if I speak too long, you will become constantly hungry. Everyone is robbed by this. Have you noticed how whenever we have discussions about when meetings should be, what time it should be, the inevitable question is, what time is lunch? What time is prasadam? What time is breakfast? It is a manifestation of a challenge in the world. We can't escape it. The third point Bhagavatam tells us is really important, is that the mind is always anxious. It is always anxious. By nature, it is always anxious. The only question as devotees is, do we convert and spiritualize our anxieties to something spiritual? Can I make it for Mangalarti? I need to wake up in the morning. I need to chant my rounds. That anxiety will at least keep us away from material anxieties. But the fourth one is very powerful. Bhagavatam tells us that intelligence in this material world runs after that which cannot be obtained. I really like this phrase. Intelligence runs after that which cannot be obtained. Therefore, if intelligence is not used in the service of Krishna, we will keep running after that desires that actually will never fulfill us, but will cause us to create and generate more desires. So therefore, misuse of intelligence is actually a nightmare for devotees. And then it is very nicely stated, samsara dharme, Jai Shri Radha Madhav ki, samsara dharme avimuya manaha. Bhagavatam, Krishna advises here that the dharma of this samsara is to bewilder us. So it is nothing surprising that when we come into this material world, there is so much challenges. To think that there is no challenges is surprising. But to accept that the challenges will be there, then it becomes easier for us to deal with them. Diti could not deal with her desire because there was no element of Krishna consciousness in this transaction. And therefore, her intelligence and her mind was anxious, and she was just running after that which she thought, by which, if she got, she would be happy. She thought later in the verses that she would have sons, and the sons would be the source of her happiness. But the sons did not become the source of her happiness. So this is a very important point. But this verse tells us something very nice at the end. Smritya Hari Bhagavata Pradhanaha. That means that as long as a devotee remains aloof from this material existence. Aloof from the material existence doesn't mean that we run away from what is happening around us. No, it means that we are able to handle the matters that come before us with the powerful weapon of devotional service. Because we have faith in devotional service has the power to protect us. This is a very important point. You know, in Kapila Dev, not Kapila Dev. Yes, Kapila Dev, in the third canto, 38 verse, Kapila Dev says this beautiful point about the power of devotional service. Nang shanti no me nimiso le dihe dihi yeshamaham priya atma sutascha sakha guro suhrido daivamishtam. And the purport in this verse is extensive. But what Kapila Dev Maha Shanta Rupe Nang Shanti no me Nimiso Ledi Hedihi. The influence of time, and no weapon in this world, the influence of time cannot, and neither can the influence of any weapon in this world, it cannot destroy the transcendental opulences of the devotees. And Srila Prabhupada in his purport, right at the start of the purport, Prabhupada defines what is this phrase, transcendental opulences. Transcendental opulences means devotional service. Devotional service is the greatest opulence that we have received. It is the greatest opulence. And Kapila Dev emphatically states that no amount of time and no weapon can destroy or take away this opulence. Why? Because the devotees of the Lord, they sincerely see Krishna as either their dear friend, their preceptor, their spiritual master, their supreme Lord. In so many different rasas, the devotees are taking shelter of Krishna. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, if one accepts Krishna as a friend, that friend will never cheat you. What a nice point. In this material world, friends always have a habit of cheating us. And if we are not careful, we also cheat them. But Prabhupada writes, if you take Krishna as a friend, Krishna will never cheat you. And Prabhupada says, if you accept Krishna, right, as a son, because that is one of the rasas, then he will never die. He will never die. If one accepts Krishna as a son, he will never die. And Srila Prabhupada writes in that purport of how in Bengal, there are so many deities who have performed last funeral rites for the devotees who actually worship them. Prabhupada writes it there. He doesn't elaborate, but he writes it there. Therefore, Krishna consciousness is a reality. It actually works. And if we have the faith that it can transcend the challenges of time and any other weapons of this material world, then we become Smritya Harihi, Bhagavat Pradana. One who is actually fixed at the lotus feet of Hari, always remembering the Lord, seeing his hand in anything. That devotee actually becomes aloof, and he becomes very dhiraha. This is the meaning of aloof. That's why Srila Prabhupada gathered all of us, and he wanted us not to stay in some corner or in a cave. He wanted us to be in the cities. He wanted us to be where the action was. But even while we were there, he knew that this devotional service and this devotional atmosphere will protect our consciousness. This is very important. So Diti's challenge was that her desire was very strong, and that desire actually overwhelmed her. There is another purport. I don't have so much time, but there's another purport, if you have time, you should look at on desires. It's actually in the 6th canto, 16th chapter, 34th verse. That's also a very important purport. In that purport, Prabhupada starts by saying that the position of all of us is to be eternally the servants of the Supreme Lord and never to be one with Him. Then Prabhupada says, if we understand that we are always servants of the Lord, we will then be samamatihi. And this is exactly the opposite of what Diti was. Diti was anything but samamatihi, because instead of thinking that I should depend on the Lord, she decided to depend on her husband. If you depend on that person who is also in the net with you, then you are also caught in the net, and that person is caught in the net. Imagine two fishes having a conversation. They are caught in the net. The first fish looks at the other fish and says, "Don't worry, my friend, I'll get you out of the net." The other fish would laugh and say, "Man, you are in the net. What makes you think you can come out of the net? If you're outside the net, then you can save me." It's like this famous saying we have, if you have $5 in your pocket, how can you give someone $6? You can't. You cannot. Therefore, Diti was bankrupt. Diti was liquidated, right? Because she had depended on a living entity for her sense enjoyment. And the moment we do that, we are in difficulty. Even in the devotional circles, sometimes I find many devotees have conflicts with each other because we unduly expect so much from each other. And we think, "Prabhu, you promised me this," or "I thought you will do that," and that is the start of the end. But we don't realize that if we understand everything from a circumspect, introspective understanding, in Bhagavatam that is known as Anusprishatad. It is one of the prayers of Brahma in the 3rd canto, last 4 shlokas. Brahma speaks to introspection. One of his prayers is that, "Let me introspect, and let me pray that pride does not overtake me." And sometimes as devotees, that expectation from other devotees can actually kill our devotional relationships. This expectation killed the relationship between Diti and Kashyap, because though they appeared like husband and wife, the challenges that came after that was overwhelming. It was overwhelming. So back to the purport, 6:1634. Prabhupada says samamati. And then he says something very nice. Devotees detest oneness with the Supreme. They have no lusty desires for oneness. Why I'm bringing this up is because very often we think lusty desires is only about sexual enjoyment. But Srila Prabhupada makes an important statement here. Lusty desire is a desire to enjoy separately from Krishna. It can be a desire for oneness with Him. It could be a desire for untold wealth. It could be a desire for name and fame. But anything that is separate from Krishna has the capacity to be a lusty desire. And then Prabhupada states a statement which will be a good way for us to wind down our time. A living entity cannot exist without desires. And this is true. We have read so many times, Prabhupada says, one cannot be desireless in this world. Some desires are always there. But Prabhupada says, a living entity cannot exist without desires, but desires that can never be fulfilled are called karma, lusty desires. Desires that can never be fulfilled are called karma, lusty desires. Therefore, we should understand that whenever we have a desire and you're running after it, but somehow by Krishna's mercy it's not being fulfilled, that is a lusty desire. And if Krishna wants it to be fulfilled, that will be a desire that He will accept. The best desire, I think, is the prayer of Vritasur in the 6th canto. Nanaka prishtam, na cha parameshtam, na sarva bhaumam, na rasadipatyam, na yoga siddhir apunar bhavamba, samanjasadva virahaya kangshe. Krishna has a very nice name in that shloka. His name is Samanjasa. Samanjasa means the source of all opportunities. Every opportunity that we get is actually Krishna. Yesterday I was hearing, I think all of us, we were mesmerized by Vaisheshika Prabhu, Prabhu's here, by his presentation. And the thing that I took away from that is exactly this point, that actually Krishna is the source of all opportunities. And there are so many opportunities for us to connect with Krishna and to get other living entities to be connected to Krishna. And Vritasur says so nicely and sweetly in this prayer, Nanaka prishtam, nacha parameshtam. I do not desire dominion over Dhruvaloka. I don't desire to rule the higher planets, the lower planets, the middle planets. I don't even desire liberation if I do not have an opportunity to serve at your lotus feet. If we are directed by that desire, then that desire, by Krishna's mercy, will eventually quell all other material desires. And in that mood, we will be able to approach Krishna. We have no material qualifications, but Krishna is so kind that He will still accept us if we somehow channel these desires at his lotus feet. Is it Lord Ram? No, it's Hanuman. It's Hanumanji and the Vanaras. In 5:19:7, they say so beautifully this prayer. Na janmanunam mahato na saubhagam navang na buddhi na krite stesha heto tairyad vrishishtan apino vanaukasha chakara sakye bata lakshmana grajaha. So they say that we have no qualification. Na janmanunam. The Vanaras, like Hanumanji, he says that I don't have high birth. I don't have education. I can't even invite you to my house because I live in a forest and I live from tree to tree to tree. But despite all my disqualifications, Chakara Sakya, Bata Lakshmana Grajaha, despite all my disqualifications, you have accepted my service, you have accepted me like my Lord, based on the qualification of friendship. So to conclude, a few very important points we should remember. The first point is that no material qualification is needed. Kashyap was very materially qualified. He was very powerful. He was an impersonalist, but he could not control his senses. Haridas Thakur had no material qualifications of the likes of Kashyap, so to speak, and yet he could very easily control his senses against the difficulties and onslaughts of material nature. He could do so. So that's the first point. The second point is, Bhagavatam tells us one very important point, that study of Srimad Bhagavatam, as I quoted the verse right at the beginning, 12:48, Srimad Bhagavatam is the solution to the challenge of material desires in this material world. Every time we are faced with this onslaught, we should bury our heads in Srimad Bhagavatam and we should study Bhagavatam from end to end. If you just simply read Bhagavatam aloud because your mind is disturbed, go try it. You'll find within 15 minutes you become very peaceful. You don't know why. There's no material logic to it, but then spiritual logic always exceeds material logic, isn't it? So this is the second point. The third point is, desires will always touch us. That is always there. We cannot artificially repress them. But like Vritrasur and all the great acharyas, we can channel them. And the best way to channel desires is in the assembly of Vaishnavas. When we have sadhu sangha, it is so much more easier to challenge the material desires that arise in our hearts. So with the weapon of Bhagavatam and the service to the Vaishnavas, Krishna willing, we will not be in the position of Diti. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Ananta Kori Vaishnavinda ki, Nitai Gaura Premanande. Thank you very much. What happens now? Are there questions? Realizations. So many Vaishnavas, I would rather like to hear realizations. Yes, Maharaj, Hare Krishna. The mic. Do we have another mic? Sorry, Maharaj, just a minute.
Devotees many times they take horoscope seriously more than the devotional qualifications.
They take horoscope seriously, yes.
And also like Kumbh Mela is on, and people taking a dip at the Sangam very seriously than like being in ISKCON tent, participating in the Bhagavatam class. And also like we hear Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj also, when they travel, they try to avoid Ekadasi or Thursday. So how do we take this thing?
I think Maharaj's point is how do we understand devotional service, and where does this reliance, Maharaj, this reliance or this faith in horoscopes and astrology, where does it sit in Krishna consciousness? That's a good point. If we follow the pages of Bhagavatam, we will find that there are so many times when a personality in Bhagavatam, according to their capacity, tried to move in one direction, but Krishna decided that they should move in another direction. Even if we were to consult our horoscopes, I believe, and it is very nicely stated, and I've read this, that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj was very expert. But in Kali Yuga, that expertise today is becoming far and few. Devotees may approach devotees within our community circles, because there are some very prominent devotees who understand horoscope and they may give it to them. And at the very most, they may be guiding posts. But ultimately, we cannot forget the fact that Krishna is in control. If Krishna decided that whatever your horoscope you're reading on day 1 is as it is, but day 2, if Krishna decides that something should happen to us, then the horoscope and everything else will go out of the window, because it is Krishna's desire. So it is safer that ultimately the devotee not be distracted by so many other avenues to understand our future, our compatibility and everything else. Because if Krishna wants, the most incompatible of persons can become compatible. And if Krishna doesn't want, the most compatible of people can have problems. I think a good example is the very context of what we are discussing today. Diti tried so hard to have sons, and she was hopeful that she would have sons, and every mother doesn't want sons to be like Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. I don't think any mother's desire is that, oh Lord, please give me Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu. I don't think they want that. But ultimately, despite her wanting to have something, at the end of the day, the fact is, Krishna wanted Jai and Vijay to be coming into this world as Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. And therefore, that is something that is the will of the Lord. There is a nice shloka, Maharaj, I'm thinking of. It's in the last shloka of the 16th chapter of the 3rd canto, 3:16:37. And there, Brahma is approached by the Devatas, because they are now worried that Jai and Vijay have fallen. And all the inauspicious omens have come. And they see the inauspiciousness coming. And they turn to Brahma naturally. And they ask him, what can we do about this? In other words, they are looking for a material solution to a material problem. Dukkaushadam tadapi dukkha matadhyayam. But Brahma's answer in that shloka is very instructive for us. I remember the translation, so I'll just state the translation. Brahma says, my dear sons, the Lord is the controller of its 3 modes of nature. Ultimately, Krishna is the controller of the 3 modes of nature. He is responsible for creation, maintenance, and dissolution. His wonderful creative power, Yoga Maya, cannot be easily understood even by the masters of yoga. Very often, my experience is devotees sometimes go to Kumbh Mela, or they may perform some auspicious activities, not because they've lost faith in Krishna per se, but because of the anxiety of the material challenges, or even the challenges that they are undergoing in this material world. So like the Devatas, they are also looking for some avenues. It is not necessarily that they don't have faith in Krishna. It's a spectrum. However, Brahma says very nicely here, and he says, Shemam Vidhashyati. This is very important. He says that the most ancient person, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he alone will come to our rescue. That most ancient person, the Supreme Personality of Godhead alone will come to our rescue. And then he ends with the last line, very nice line. What purpose can we serve on his behalf by deliberating on the subject? What purpose can we serve on his behalf by deliberating on the subject? So, if we are thinking of whether we are going through a difficult time and whether we should look at astrology and then deliberate further about what we should do about it, then let's not forget the words of Brahmaji. What purpose can we serve on his behalf by deliberating on the subject? Better we deliberate on Krishna. and better we investment, right? Iti matir upakalpita vritrishna Bhishmadev, right? He invested all his thinking, his feeling, and his willing into the Lord. And in that way, we will become much more pacified than if we were to try to depend fully or substantially on the other areas that are available for us. That's my understanding, Maharaj. I hope it's useful. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much. It is an honor to be with you, and I wish you all the best in your spiritual life. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. This is an announcement regarding His Grace Vaishika Prabhu's Be a Gardener campaign that he announced a couple of days ago. If somebody has already pledged and yet to make a donation, or they want to know more about the Chaitanya Chaitamrit sponsorship, please come over to the desk right behind Narsimhadev. We'll be there until 9:30 a.m. Thank you. Hare Krishna.